Forward, they cannot stop us now. Only hope to contain us. Let them try and knock us down. Onward, they'll never stop us now. So they hope to contain us. Let them try and knock us down. This is hallway memory flashback. We watch them sugarcoat.
Hey everybody, this is Sam from Out of the Armchair Podcast. How you doing today? Hope everybody's having a great day. I had some extra time today, so I thought I'd shoot a real quick video. Before we get started, if you like what you see here today, go down there and click that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. And also you can find us on Facebook at our Out of the Armchair Podcast. There's a dash there, Out of the Armchair Podcast. A lot of great conversations go on there. We share some pretty cool memes and quotes from great philosophers and whatnot. So today I wanted to kind of make a little short video about addiction. There's a lot of misconceptions about addiction and what exactly it is and how it works in the brain and its functionality in people's lives. So I want to start off by, I have to stick to the subject I know most, which is opioids, heroin, fentanyl, carfentanil. For those of you that don't know, in 2016 I started a nonprofit organization focused on the opioid crisis. And at that time, nobody around in my area was even having that conversation. We were still talking about, alcohol, marijuana, methamphetamine, stuff like that. We live in a production town. A lot of industrial stuff here, a lot of industrial work. We build RVs. So methamphetamines was a huge problem in our community, and it still is a problem. But again, I'm going to stay focused on what I know about. So how does an opioid addiction start? Generally, like 7 out of 10 people start, 7 out of 10 heroin addicts, start off by using prescription opioids, right? So they have a tooth removed, they have a bad back, bad knee, just come out of surgery, something like that. They're prescribed opioids, and they're highly addictive, regardless of what we were told in the past. And basically people, develop an addiction to that. There was a guy that I was told about by one of my colleagues who came and started their treatment program. And what had happened to him is he received some kind of injury or something like that. And again, he got a prescription for opioids. Ended up, when his prescription was cut off, he found himself in withdrawal, not even realizing that he was addicted, right, to this prescription that he was given by his doctor. And to be fair, a lot of us trust what our doctors tell us to do with our bodies. We're not doctors. We don't know. We go to them for their advice, right? So it's got to kind of have that trust. Unfortunately, doctors were lied to. We won't get into the whole pharmaceutical thing, but responsibility lies in everybody's hands in this, I believe, right? The addict, the doctor, the pharmaceutical companies, everybody has a little bit of responsibility here. So I'm not going to try to blame shift or point fingers at anybody. That's not my job. My job is to get you to understand how addiction works as a chronic brain disease and why it's a chronic brain disease. So why do people turn to heroin from prescription opioids? One thing would be the withdrawal, right? The withdrawal becomes so severe that most people that are in withdrawal, claim that they wish that they would just have died. Okay, it's pretty severe in most cases. I've talked people through their withdrawals over several days. I've tried to be there for them as much as I could, bring them stuff they need, and so yeah, I've seen this play out firsthand. So that'd be probably the number one reason I think people turn to using heroin. The second would be financial reasons, so if somebody's addicted to a prescription opiate and suddenly their doctor pulls their prescription because, maybe you're getting too addicted to this drug, maybe you're becoming dependent. So they pull the prescription. So then people go to that street. Generally what happens is they start buying pills from the street, which if anybody has any experience in this area, pills can be $20 to $30 depending on what you're getting, what type of drug it is. That can be very, very expensive, especially when you think about a hit of heroin being, I think the last number I heard was $8, right? And it's going to last you twice as long as what this pill is going to last you. It's going to get you much higher. Okay. Um, so that would be another reason. I mean, there's several reasons, but what happens in the brain? How do people get to this point? What happens in the brain is you have a hormone. It's called dopamine. It's a chemical that's released into your brain whenever something good happens to you. It's part of what keeps us motivated. It's part of what keeps us transcending through our daily goals. Getting out of bed, going to work, taking care of our kids, paying our bills, feeding the dogs and cats, feeding ourselves, visiting family. I mean, dopamine is responsible for a lot of the great things we do in our lives and even in our reproduction process. So your brain maintains about a 70-80 deciliter range. That's your baseline. Okay. That's the baseline that everybody has generally, any healthy brain. And when your brain releases dopamine when you like see the face of your mother, see the face of your spouse, hug your children, have a good home cooked meal, right? Things that are good for us, because the brain operates on a reward system. And so every time you do something good for yourself, right, your brain gives you a reward. And with things like sex, you get like 250 deciliters. And that's one of the highest levels the human brain is built to maintain through and to get back to their baseline. When you use something like heroin, right, or even methamphetamines, sticking to heroin, when you use something like heroin, it shoots your dopamine deciliters up to like 1,000, right? Your brain is not used to that, and it floods your brain with so much dopamine that your brain suddenly thinks that you're starting to get it from an outside resource. So it says, well, if you're doing that, I'm going to maintain efficiency for the human body, and I'm not going to make that chemical anymore. I'm going to shift my focus, since you're giving it to me, from a different resource anyway. So now, at this point, the brain is no longer maintaining a baseline of 70-80 deciliters, right? And again, that 70-80 deciliters is what gets us out of bed every day. It's what transcends us into our daily goals, even our life goals. It's a huge part of what we do and why we do what we do. And when you don't have that anymore, you suddenly lose that motivation. Depression sets in. I mean, physical pain starts to happen. And you don't get up and try to transcend your daily goals. You don't have that baseline anymore because your body's no longer producing it. So at this point, you've effectively broken your brain. Okay, and this is why addiction is a chronic brain disease. I think one of the numbers that was given to me, after 18 months of complete clean time, the brain at that point, they think, starts to repair itself to delivering its regular dopamine regimen. Okay, and I don't even think those numbers are really on paper yet. So this is the talk in the community, in the social work community. So this is what makes addiction a chronic brain disease, is because you actually break your brain. Right? It's not a lack of willpower. It's not a lack. It's not from having a weak character or weak personality. I mean, those are just harmful arguments to have. And this information I'm giving you is available to anybody, anywhere. Look it up. Do the research. Go to the CDC. Go to some of these sites that are really focused on this problem, and the evidence is right there. So when people tell me that it's not a brain disease, that's a lack of willpower, that people are weak, I think you're being really condescending to the situation, and it's probably something you don't really know a lot about. And if I've been told several times that if your conversation is not helpful in these situations, then it can only be harmful. And I'm trying to give you these facts because we need to stop spreading this misinformation. Because what it does is it creates a stigma around addiction. and people feel ashamed because they feel like they're weak and they don't have the willpower to be a normal person. And you're robbing them of their hope of becoming a productive person. I know some of you haven't ever experienced this firsthand, so you're likely detached from the situation, which oftentimes leaves you more ignorant to the facts of the situation. So, in listening to this, I hope some of you take that into consideration. I have no reason to come on here and lie to you about anything. I have nothing to convince you of. I'm just trying to present you with some facts. Okay? So, feel free to push back if you want. I've got all the information that I think I need to make my case. So what do we do? How do we treat? How is the treatment community treating people that have broken their brains? Well, we have things in place like MATS programs, which for those of you that don't know, it's medically assisted treatment programs, right? So we're talking in the area of opioids and heroin. We're talking about methadone, Suboxone, Subutex, Vivitrol, some of the most effective medicines that we've found so far to combat this. Okay. I'm not such a big fan of methadone, but I will say this. When you think about people using heroin, right? You're talking about injecting drugs that they're buying from some street pharmacist or some street chemist who thinks he knows what he's doing. But look around at the loss of life around us. Obviously, these are street chemists. They don't know what they're doing. And in the heroin we're finding now is, fentanyl, which is 100 times more potent than heroin, and carfentanil, which is 1,000 times more potent. So, and they're mixing this in with regular heroin. Now, heroin today is a lot different than the heroin we've seen in the 50s and the 60s. I think the numbers back then, the potency was something like 30-40%, whereas now in just heroin, we're seeing 80-90% potency. Okay, and on top of that, you have these street chemists who are adding drugs like fentanyl, right, which is usually used for people who are likely not to make it through whatever medical condition they have, cancer patients specifically. And you have carfentanil, which is actually an elephant tranquilizer. Okay, and there was a story about an officer who was searching a car for heroin. They had, I think it was carfentanil in the vehicle. The officer brushed up against some of it on his neck, right, and overdosed on the spot. Woke up in the hospital from searching a car. Okay, and just to give you an idea of how dangerous this drug is, you're talking about a few grains soaked through his skin. Okay, that's pretty potent. That's pretty powerful. We have a few grains of something that can take a human life. So when you think about the fact that a lot of the heroin that people are getting on the streets is not the pure heroin. It's not. It's laced with fentanyl, carfentanil, whatever other concoctions they tend to come up with. So using something like methadone is a lot safer than having somebody on streets using whatever heroin they're getting from the guy down the block or the guy at the 7-Eleven that may be laced with fentanyl or carfentanil. It's a lot cleaner, right? And yes, it can be abused. And it's why programs like that need to be strictly monitored. There has been, some talk of lack of record keeping, which I hope isn't true. But again, we're talking about night and day difference here from using heroin from the street to popping a methadone pill. In Suboxone, Suboxone has a slight amount of I want to say that I think it's Suboxone that has something to help with the withdrawals, right? And it also has a blocker in it, if I remember correctly. No, that's wrong. Vivitrol is the opioid blocker, and I think it has some stuff in there that helps with the withdrawal symptoms. So, um, you know, I would just go advise you to look all this stuff up for yourself. Suboxone, Subutex, Methadone, and Vivitrol, which I'm a big fan of Vivitrol. Uh, so what happens is we get people into these detox centers, where they can have medically assisted detox if that's the route they choose to go, or if that's the route their insurance will cover. And what happens is, they go to these detox centers, stay 7 to 10 days, I think it is, and then you leave there with a Suboxone prescription. And then hopefully you dial right into an IOP program with someplace like Oakland, or some other treatment provider in the area. Oakland's a big one in our area. One of my favorites, one of my greatest partners and allies in this fight. So then we can get them into programs and hopefully get them enough clean time and keep them away from withdrawing and being scared of withdrawals, that they can actually attach themselves to their treatment. Unfortunately, it has been ineffective to force people into treatment. So here in Indiana, you actually have to have the addict sign up for treatment themselves. So in my life, I watched this whole thing unfold with my brother, who started off with prescription to opioids. I think he got a back injury working for one of the factories here, which shall remain nameless. And I think it was just less than a year. It was a little more than a year, and he was using heroin. We tried everything we could, send him to treatment centers, try to intervene as much as we could, but ultimately it was up to him. He had about 6 weeks of clean time, got him a job, got his check, went out and bought some heroin and overdose and died. It happened that quickly. So for those of you that don't understand it, try to be a little more sensitive to what the actual situation is. The subject's a little harder for me to talk about because, for obvious reasons. But there is hope. We're starting to see drastic numbers drop in severe places like Ohio, where they had a 49 or 52% decrease in overdoses, thanks to the availability of treatment, insurance, and naloxone. One of the things I think we face in this opioid crisis, and one of the truths I think we have to settle with, is 80%. If America is consuming 80% of the global opioid market, like, what is the rest of the world doing for pain management? It's my firm belief that we need to redefine pain management, and until we do that, we're never going to get rid of this problem, right? Portion size, portion control is not going to work. We've seen with the same case with McDonald's. They stopped serving the super gulps, or the super sized and whatnot. But that doesn't mean people just aren't going to buy more pop, right? You're just not buying it from your establishment. They're going to go down to 7-Eleven when they finish their pop they got from McDonald's and pick up another pop. The same thing with French fries. If somebody wants more French fries, is going to order more French fries. So I don't see where the evidence for portion control is really going to work. When we first started this portion control thing, seen, unfortunately, a doctor was attacked and killed in South Bend for failing to provide opioids to this guy's wife, which I guess ultimately turned out that the guy was actually taking his wife's pills. Very, very unfortunate, and I really feel for the doctor's family. I don't see how we get out of this without redefining pain management. I don't see how we can keep putting opioids into the streets. And originally opioids were approved for after major surgeries, right? It wasn't approved for toothaches, and, injured knees and back pain, stuff like that. It was supposed to be for after major surgeries, and it eventually just integrated to where we were prescribing it for every little pain that people were having. Part of that reason is because there were pain surveys being taken at the hospital. So if you've been to the ER, excuse me, if you've been to the ER, then you've been asked that question before. How do you rate your pain on a scale from 1 to 10? Well, an addict, every time, even if they're not even at a 1, is going to say 8, 9, or 10. Right? Um, Anybody who can't handle pain, is a low tolerance for pain, is gonna seek to find more comfortability. And there was an aim in the medical industry that doctors were to make their patients more comfortable. So that plays another factor. You know, we've seen this explosion happen, and it came out of nowhere. A lot of us were, you know, so and so's using heroin. Who does heroin anymore? Like, that's a drug of the past. Well, it's been resurrected through pharmaceutical companies. Purdue Pharma, to be exact, I would place most of the blame on. Yeah, so, and all that, it's not to say that sobriety can't be found, right? We know more about the disease now. We know more about how to treat it. We know more about where it's coming from. The things that people are doing, the different chemicals people are putting into their bodies. We know more about this now. We've studied a lot in the last few years on this opioid crisis. Luckily, we were able to get the conversation started here, so we were able to provide naloxone to a lot of places that were in need, that were likely to come across overdose victims, and we're able to protect their businesses from that. So there's several ways for treatment, and I'm not really one to talk about treatment, but I do want to talk about one of my favorite ideas. It's a form of harm reduction, which is somewhat what the naloxone program is too. It's a harm reduction program. So it's more or less, like I said earlier in the video, trying to keep people alive long enough that we can get them into treatment. You know, nobody wakes up and says, man, I want to be a heroin addict today. Nobody does that. It's just the lack of treatment centers, the lack of detox centers, the lack of insurance availability that covers these types of programs. I mean, this has played a major stumbling block. It's been a major stumbling block for addicts trying to get into treatment who legitimately want to get clean. And we can't talk about people not getting clean without, you know, bringing that factor into play. I don't think I've ever met a heroin addict that just wants to be a heroin addict. I mean, I'm not disputing there may be somebody out there that's just completely lost and, you know, this is what they want to do. But I personally have never met a heroin addict that wants to be a heroin addict, and like ever. And I've met hundreds of them. So one of my favorite ideas in harm reduction is this idea that, okay, if somebody comes into treatment, right, and let's say they have a heroin problem, right, and it's impeding their lives. They're unable to work. They can't take care of their children. You know, maybe their kids have been taken away or staying with, you know, grandparents or whatever the situation may be. So they come in, but let's say this person also is a social drinker. And let's say they go out sometimes on the weekend and have a drink with friends, or maybe they use some marijuana. But the marijuana and the alcohol aren't the biggest problems in their life, right? It's not causing them financial disparity. It's not causing them to not take care of the children or take care of the responsibilities as a productive human being in our society. But heroin is. So what this idea does is it says, well, let's not focus on the alcohol and the marijuana for now. Let's focus on what's really going on. Let's focus on this heroin problem. Because a lot of treatment providers want you to take a drug test every week or two. I'm not sure, you know, I'm sure it varies with whatever program you're in, but they want you to take a drug test. And if you fail a drug test, or, you know, 2 drug tests or whatever, even if it's not for the drug that you have a problem with, you will be kicked out of that program. Okay? And what that does is it leaves people without the help that they need, the treatment that they came to seek. Right? And if that happens, if they lose their support system, well, what's going to happen? and go back to using. I mean, let's think back to when we were talking about, people having some clean time, and then they go back to using, especially with heroin. Very, very high risk for overdose at that point. So there's a lot of different methods in approaching the problem, and I think this is probably one of the greatest ideas, and I think it needs to be implemented across the whole spectrum, because if we're not treating people for exactly what's wrong with their lives, because I think it's been told to me before, somebody said, well, how do you decide when an addiction is an addiction? How do you decide when when using a certain substance or doing a certain action becomes an addiction? And it was defined to me as a moment, uh, the way it was defined to me was when it starts to impede your life negatively, when it starts to have a negative impact on your life. So, financially, um, functionality wise, if it's causing you some kind of disparity in your life, and you can't stop doing it, then that's classified as an addiction. So in the case of the person who comes in that wants treatment that has a problem with heroin, but is only a social drinker, maybe a social marijuana smoker, right? These other two, alcohol and marijuana, are not the biggest problems, and we need to concentrate on what the biggest problem is and get them treated for that. I know not all my colleagues agree with me on that, and that's fine. But I think to say that somebody should be kicked out of a program for something that they don't have a problem with, that maybe they're registering on some test, is a little hasty. And I think the help is much more important to the bigger problem they're having. Now, I'm not saying that we should condone them using alcohol or marijuana, right? What I'm saying is focus on the problem at hand. And once you've got that once you've eradicated that, or all but eradicated it, then maybe you can start concentrating on these other outlying problems that are going on in this person's life. To me, that seems like the most logical way to go about it, because we're leaving people out in the field high and dry that came in looking for treatment, that want to get clean, and it just feels like we may be turning our backs on them at some point. So when we look at harm reduction, I think we need to look at that a little more seriously. And I hope that some of you that may be treatment providers are looking into getting into being a treatment provider or a social worker of some sort. I hope you look into that a little more, because I think it's a really good idea. And a lot of other people do too. A couple weeks ago, I got a call from a friend of mine who I'm going to have on here to talk about some of these issues here, which hopefully will be able to provide a little more clarity than what I have today. Called me up and told me that him and his colleagues had nominated me for the National Academy of Social Workers Community Partner Award. So if you're wondering why I feel like I can talk on this, it's because I have done a lot of work in this area. And a humbling experience it was when he called me and said that. I think there's a lot of different people out there that perhaps deserve it more than I do. He wouldn't hear any of that. He said it was an easy choice for him. So I thank him for that nomination. Regardless of if I get it or not, it doesn't really matter to me. The thought that you guys would put me up on something like that is very humbling, and I'm very, very grateful for the chance to call you guys friends and work with you guys and call you colleagues as well. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say today. So I guess my ending message is, I know we kind of went a few different places today, but I guess my ending message is, before you claim you have some kind of information on any given subject, especially something as sensitive as this, be sure you know what you're talking about, because you could be causing more harm in somebody's life than what they need, whether it be a coworker, a friend, a family member. We've been taught throughout the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years that it's a lack of willpower. Addiction is a lack of willpower. Anybody can just stop, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure there are cases out there of people that did just stop. And that's great. I'm glad it worked for you like that. But you're not everybody, right? And all these situations have to be approached as an individual situation, because we are dealing with individuals who've had different traumas in their life, who come from different walks of life, who talk different languages. It's in this goodwill season, if you're able to stand there and tell me that you think somebody should just die because they have a chronic brain disease, because they have something that we can help them with, and well, they're just not worth it because they don't have the willpower, or they're not good enough, I think you're an asshole. I think you're a piece of shit. I don't think you should be spreading that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm just gonna be plain and blunt with you, because for somebody to, for a nation of people who celebrate a holiday that's built towards goodwill towards men, it's built around love for your neighbor, love for your friends, love for, the people in your life, for your environment. This is a time of celebration of love and life. And this is when our most humanistic values tend to show. So when you're writing your Christmas cards and stuff this year, I want you to think about addicts in that context. When you're writing that and you're having that feel-good, warm feeling that you have when you're wishing somebody well for the season, or you're showing your humanistic side. I want you to think about addicts and how they could play in that too, because I think a lot more altruism would do the situation some good. And I hope I changed some of you guys' minds today. If I didn't, I'm going to provide some links in the description to go with this video, and I hope that you take the time to research that, so when you are talking about this subject, you have a footing to stand on, and you understand why we say addiction is a chronic brain disease, because it is. I pretty much laid it out for you, right? You can dispute this, you can dispute that idea, but just know that you're disputing it in ignorance, and there's a lot to be learned about it. There's a portion of our population out there that needs our help, that needs our love, that needs our support, needs our understanding, and they deserve it. When people think about heroin addicts, they think about, this tattooed up white guy with fishnet armbands or whatever and tattoos, and he probably hasn't bathed in so many days, but it's not. No, actually, a lot of times it's the white suburban mother down the road, right? Or your friends' your neighbor's kid, your kid, your brother, your sister, your mother. That's who these people are. So, again, I implore you to show a lot more altruism towards your fellow human beings, regardless of what problems they're dealing with. Because it's not up to you to judge them, but it is up to us to try to help them and try to provide some clarity as to what humanity is. A lot of times when we find ourselves in situations where we have to show our humanity, it's not something we set up, it's not something we ask for. It's just something you do. And I know a lot of people that were addicted to heroin, or addicted to prescription opioids, who a lot of you may have called, different names. But they got clean. Because sobriety is possible. And it doesn't seem that way when we're morally attacking people. And you're spreading the wrong message when you do that. It's important to understand that addiction doesn't change who a person loves, right? Or what a person loves. It changes how they love. That person is still in there. Now, I've watched them go in and come back out. They were stronger people on the back end, but they were the same person, you know. So, this Christmas season, when you're thinking about people out there that are using drugs and you have this negative connotation to it, again, when you're writing those Christmas cards, think about the humanity you're trying to show there, and see if you can't implement that some way towards addicts, towards these mental illnesses that people suffer from every day in our community. I mean, how could it be wrong to build up your community? How could it be wrong to show love and support to another human being? I mean, I just can't find any foul in that. So I'm going to leave it there. I think I've rambled on long enough. I will revisit this very, very soon. I'm likely to shoot another video for this over the next few days as I gather some more thoughts from watching this one, and get some feedback from my colleagues and some of you other people who may disagree with me. If you're going to disagree with me, do it in a respectable fashion, and I will address your concern. Promise. Okay? So if you like what you've seen here today, click that subscribe button down there. Go to our Facebook page, Out of the Armchair -podcast, and you'll be able to keep up to date with everything we talk about. So have a great day, and I will see you later.